Well, welcome again. We're glad to be with you. So we are looking at our first picture, and that picture is, I believe, the Bear Mountains in Montana. And we had a situation that we had to stop and spend 3 days there. We had a radiator leak that had to be repaired, and so we had this beautiful little RV site overlooking this just beautiful country in Montana. So if you ever get a chance to go through and spend some time, this is lovely, lovely country. Thank you, Sherry, for the beautiful pictures you take, and I hope you enjoy them as well. So we are going to have a conversation. We're into parables, as you may have noticed in our series. The title of this one is A Very Small Seed and a Very Small Amount of Leaven. And I call this the outcomes of the kingdom. But let me frame this conversation this way. When Jesus speaks in parables, he's talking about things that happen at the end of time. He's talking about things that happen in his ministry. And in these parables, he is giving a beautiful defense of the gospel itself. So I want you to listen to this presentation in that context, that Jesus is giving this beautiful defense of the gospel. And I think that will make a difference. The other thing I want you to consider is that the listeners are Middle Easterners in the time of Jesus. They are not Westerners in Western civilization like you and I may be, or wherever it is you are listening. They think differently. So we're going to address that in our conversation. So let's begin. There are two parables we're going to deal with. We call them kingdom parables, and you'll see why in just a moment. The kingdom parables are intended to move your focus to an unexpected outcome. Now, Jesus' perspective gives us freedom to embrace his kingdom as he sees it and be pleasantly surprised and amazed from his point of view, because his point of view is nothing like ours. So we begin our story. Matthew 13, 31 through 33. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, and I emphasize that, very tiny seed. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. That's a very, and you'll see how great that tree is. Now, the mustard seed, in the locations where Jesus is speaking along the lake in this part of the area, they say that mustard grows between 8 and 10 feet tall with the right soil and right water. But every word in this parable emphasizes the tiniest thing, and then every word emphasizes the greatness of the tree becoming a home for the birds. Now, some scholars would say this parable would represent the Gentiles embracing the gospel and resting in the great gospel tree. That is certainly one perspective. It is an unexpected outcome of the kingdom, because if the kingdom of heaven is like a tree coming, this beautiful 10-foot tall tree of mustard plant coming from this tiny little seed. Now just process that for just a moment. What an unexpected outcome. What happened to cause such exponential growth? So I always pose some questions for you. It says in this parable, the man planted a seed. So I'm going to challenge you. Is this man Jesus? It is his gospel. Is this seed planter, this man, a symbol of a church member? Maybe you. Who planted that seed? Are you a seed planter? And another perspective is this little tiny gospel seed planted in you so that you become that refuge, if you would, of that beautiful tree? Are you a seed planter? Those are just all things that this parable challenges you with. You see, the seed is the gospel. It goes from the tiniest thing to the most amazing thing, making a home for many. And who makes that gospel tree grow? Who takes that little tiny seed of the gospel and makes it grow into this grand 10-foot tall tree? Now, you and I cannot make a plant grow. We can cultivate, we can plant seeds, but who makes the 10-foot tall tree the host of the birds and the home and the safe place for them? Who makes it grow is profound truth. Do we understand our part in this parable? But more importantly, do we understand God's part in this parable? That God has created this thing called the gospel, and to us sometimes it may look like a little tiny, almost insignificant thing. But may I answer my own question? God makes the gospel into this grand, beautiful, safe refuge, which is beyond our capacity as human beings. There's a twist in the parable. You see, the Eastern mind, the seed planted and sprouted is simply a miracle. We in the West think of the food in the soil and the process, the sprouted seed, and we have this whole scientific and biology picture of that entire process. But that science and perspective is, may I say, exclusive to Westerners, but to the Easterner, they see every seed as something that died in the fall, went dormant, and that when it's planted, it brings life and the power of resurrection in new life, and that new life from this seed is extended now to everyone, including the Gentiles. This is the power of the kingdom of God. This is a gospel miracle. And that's how they would be hearing this parable. I hope that you and I can pause for just a moment and hear that parable in the same way. But then in the text, it goes directly to another parable. And this one is stunning. Here's the whole parable in one verse. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. End of parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal until it was all leavened. So let's focus on this. As is the case of the kingdom of God, it's like a small, tiny amount of leaven, just like the mustard seed. Jesus is doing this parable again from another perspective. The emphasis here is in the sharp contrast from the smallest thing of leaven to the greatness of what happens to that leaven when it's put in the dough. So, to your surprise, this is about a bushel of flour, of meal, about 50 pounds, and it's mixed with a small amount of leaven, and then you know, my mother always put a towel over the bread and let it rise. Well, if she put that out in the evening in the Middle East in the warm and put a blanket over it or something, then the morning when she got up, this would be enough bread dough to feed more than 100 people. Now, to you and I, we may not think much about this because we use bread machines and we don't make homemade bread in the same way anymore. But pause for a moment and put yourself in the position of a listener. They were utterly amazed at the amount of volume that would be produced by that small amount of leaven. But there's a twist in this parable, a major twist. You see, in Ezekiel 31 and in Daniel 4, the great tree represented pagan nations. And in the mustard tree, Jesus twists that one around and now makes it the greatness of the kingdom of God. But in the story or the parable of the leaven in Exodus 12:15, leaven was correlated with sin. At the Passover in Egypt, they removed all leaven from their house, ate unleavened bread for 7 days before that night of the Passover of the angel of death. Now, the listeners knew the story of leaven and what it represented. They knew what trees represented. The audience knew the symbols. Jesus shockingly reverses them now to apply in these parables to the kingdom of God, starting from something insignificant to something grand and big and wonderful. And if Jesus is speaking in defense of the gospel, what is the good news here? That first of all, he is the one who takes something small and insignificant, the good news that you are saved by faith of Jesus in your life, and he grows it into something big and grand. He takes the mustard tree and turns it into a church filled with simply tens of thousands and millions of people. That small message of the gospel that you are saved by faith alone. I want to thank you for listening. I've given you, I hope, some things to ponder and think about the gospel. But I hope that I've given you a moment to enter into a conversation with Jesus and see that he takes this little bit of good news and grows you into something magnificent. That he takes individuals and brings them together and makes something called the church, which is just grand and wonderful and amazing, a miracle, fully divine touch of Jesus with the gospel, making the church a miracle. So I put on for our final picture today where we're going up a pass, and Sherry just had me stop, and she had to get out and go stand on the edge of the pass and just take one more beautiful picture of the valley here in Montana. So thank you, Sherry. I just pray you'll go back and look at these parables and see that they are just filled with good news for you today. Blessings. Take care.